Rome wasn't born an empire. It took one. Before ruling the Mediterranean, it faced a rival no one thought could fall. Yet somehow, against history's greatest minds, cultures, and armies, it came out on top. How did it turn the tables on the world's most advanced civilization? Rome's road to an empire didn't begin with a march of legions. It began with a drunken insult that spiraled into a conflict no one saw coming. And that insult lit the fuse for one of the most unexpected conquests in history. The Tarentum Greeks were drunk while celebrating the festival of Dionysus, and it seemed they believed that the Romans were coming for them. There was a treaty barring Roman ships from the Gulf, so the Tarentines sank 4 Roman vessels and attacked many of the men aboard the ships. Then they marched to the Roman garrison at Turi, drove the soldiers out, and started plundering. When the Roman Senate sent envoys to demand an explanation for the attack, the envoys were mistreated. A huge insult in those days. The envoys, wearing their fine togas, addressed a crowd on the stage, and the Trentines mocked their clothes, called them barbarians, and jeered at them. This is important. The suggestion being that the Greeks thought themselves superior. In fact, Roman historian Cassius wrote that someone threw filth on the ambassador's toga. Obviously annoyed, the ambassador replied that the Greeks would pay with battle. We should note that ancient historians, often biased, played up the drama. Even so, this was a turning point in history. Rome declared war. But to understand how the Romans and the Greeks ended up on a collision course, we have to go back to when Greece ruled the ancient world. By the time Rome got ideas of becoming an empire, Greece had already perfected the blueprint for the Western world. But it didn't come easy. The Greeks had risen, fought off Persia, and then torn each other apart in brutal wars between Athens and Sparta. Out of the ruins came Macedon, where Philip II and his son Alexander the Great finally united the Greek city-states, and that changed history forever. No one had seen anything like Alexander's conquest. But all great powers come to an end, and in 323 BC, it was Greece's turn. Alexander was dead, and his world lay in pieces. In that chaos, Rome found its chance. Southern Italy had been colonized by the Greeks centuries earlier, so much so that it became known as Magna Graecia, or Great Greece. Greek was spoken in its cities, and their temples, theaters, and marketplaces gave the Italian South a very Hellenic look and feel. It was Greece and Italy side by side with the Italic tribal confederations living in their own less advanced communities. The local tribes traded with the Greeks, but they also fought, allied, and even signed on as mercenaries for Greek causes, including against the Romans. Some of the most important Greek cities included Neapolis, better known as Naples, which became a thriving cultural and commercial hub. Across the water in Sicily, there was Syracuse, a powerhouse that would later play a major role in Rome's rise. The wealthiest of all was Tarentum, a Spartan colony that was rich, powerful, and proud. With a population of 100,000 or more, it wasn't a provincial backwater. It was a bastion of Greek power abroad. The entire region also boasted remarkable intellectual firepower. Some of the greatest minds of the ancient world lived in southern Italy, like Pythagoras, who lived in Croton. It was through this colonization of Italy that Greek civilization started to influence Rome. The Romans were tough, but they gradually absorbed Greek ideas in art, philosophy, architecture, and religion. But this wasn't a one-way relationship. As Rome's power grew, it began to spread into Magna Graecia too. And this time, the spread was literal. In 342 BC, Archidamus III, the king of Sparta, marched his army to southern Italy to aid Tarentum when it was under threat from nearby Italic tribes. He was killed in battle a few years later, leaving Tarentum exposed and vulnerable to attack. In 334 BC, Alexander I of Epirus, the brother-in-law of Alexander the Great, crossed the Adriatic to Tarentum again to help push back the Italic peoples, who had been there long before the Greeks arrived. The Semites, Lucanians, and Brutians had been raiding, attacking, and making life miserable for the Greek settlers. The Romans farther north weren't ready to dominate all of Italy yet, so they stayed out of the chaos in the south. Rome had its hands full fighting the Semites, a tough warlike mountain people who refused to bow to anyone. For now, Rome and the Greek cities weren't enemies, but that wouldn't last forever. Rome was growing fast, and it was only a matter of time before it looked south. It was a precarious time for those Greeks, who knew that they'd have to face the Romans sooner or later. So they allied with the Semites. At first, it didn't seem like a bad idea. In 321 BC, Rome suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of the Cushian Forks. For a while, it looked like the Semites and their Greek allies might actually hold Rome back. But the Romans came out the winners at the Battle of Tarentum in 295 BC. This wasn't good news for the Greeks. Rome was getting closer. Confident and expanding fast, it established a colony at Venusia, which was the Greeks' backyard. Around 20,000 people were stationed there, many of them soldiers. When Rome moved troops in, it usually meant only one thing. If that wasn't enough, the Lusitanians were threatening smaller Greek cities like Trireme and others. Fearing they would be overrun, these cities didn't turn to their fellow Greeks for help. They turned to the rising power of Rome. Rome agreed and sent troops south. But the soldiers never fought the Italic tribes. Instead, they were attacked by the Greeks of Tarentum. Their mission ended before it began. After Tarentum's drunken attack and the insult to Rome's envoys, war was now inevitable. The Greeks weren't naive. They had been watching Rome's rise for some time, and they knew exactly what was at stake. The Democrats were eager for war, warning that if they did nothing, Rome would swallow them. Despite the constant infighting between the Greek city-states, each had its own circle of allies. For Tarentum, that ally was Pyrrhus, a kingdom straddling what is today Greece and Albania. It was ruled by Pyrrhus of Epirus, one of the greatest generals in the ancient world, who had married into the Macedonian royal family. He too was wary of Roman expansion, and he was in debt to the Tarentians. Pyrrhus knew that he could enlist the help of various tribes. His master plan was to secure Tarentum first, and then move on to Sicily and drive out the Carthaginians who controlled much of the island's west coast, territory Pyrrhus wanted for himself. When that was done, he would reconquer Macedon, which he had lost in 285 BC. So with Macedon still in the back of his mind, Pyrrhus gathered his army and set out to aid the Trentines, launching the Pyrrhic War. He brought around 25,000 men, 20 war elephants, and a plan to unmake Rome. Another 3,000 soldiers went ahead as an advance force. Meanwhile, the Roman army numbered between 40,000 and 50,000 men. The first clash came at Heraclea in southern Italy. Ancient historians wrote that the Roman legionnaires hurled themselves at Pyrrhus's dense Epirot phalanx, but couldn't break through. Then when Pyrrhus's cavalry struck from the flanks, the Roman line finally buckled. The Romans lost around 7,000 men. Yet they managed to make an orderly retreat to the north, their honor almost intact. But Pyrrhus was not a happy man. He had lost 3,000 men with no way of replacing them. Costly as it was, the victory had its advantages. Several Italic peoples, the Lucanians, Brutians, and Messapians, joined Pyrrhus's cause, along with the Greek cities of Croin and Loki. The Romans now faced an uphill battle. Driven out of the south, they watched as Pyrrhus pushed north, sealing an alliance with the Semites, who had already joined them in resisting Rome. Pyrrhus struck a deal with his new Italian allies. If they helped him now, he would help when Rome came for them. But Pyrrhus wasn't exactly a man of his word. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. In the spring of 279 BC, Pyrrhus marched against the Roman colonies of Luceria and Venusia. The Romans were in serious trouble. To keep their allies loyal and their armies in the field, they minted new coinage to pay for the war effort. With about 40,000 men, the Romans faced Pyrrhus again in battle. Once again, they were driven back. Pyrrhus tried to storm the Roman camp, but failed to take it. His army lost about 3,500 men, while the Romans suffered roughly 6,000 casualties. Those numbers might not sound huge today, but in the ancient world, they were devastating. A major city like Athens had only between 360,000 and 610,000 people in total, and that included women, children, and slaves. The irony was that Pyrrhus, despite winning, was furious. He had been wounded by a javelin, watched his camp go up in flames, and then realized that victory could feel a lot like defeat. According to legend, he complained, "If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined." Maybe it was dark humor, but that line would go down in history. It gave us the term Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly that it's hardly a win at all. Pyrrhus had beaten Rome again, but he was no closer to restoring his power in Macedon or building the empire he had dreamed of. The Romans agreed to a prisoner exchange and promised to keep their hands off of Tarentum, but that wouldn't last long. Pyrrhus himself agreed to an armistice and effectively abandoned the Semites and Lucanians to future Roman attacks. Then when Carthage attacked Greek Syracuse, Pyrrhus sailed off to Sicily, leaving his Italian allies behind. The Romans took their chance defeating the Semites, Lucanians, and Grecians in his absence. Meanwhile, in Tarentum, Pyrrhus had left behind a garrison, and that didn't sit so well with the locals. They began to suspect he had plans of his own for the city. Their message was clear: either come back and fight or take your men. To win back their trust, Pyrrhus marched against the Romans once again, but this time he was defeated. Frustrated and out of options, he sailed back to Epirus with his tail between his legs. Soon after, the people of Tarentum surrendered to Rome. Now the Romans rolled through southern Italy like a storm and brought the Greek cities of Magna Graecia under control. Rome was rising fast, and everyone knew it. And as with all empires in history, Rome cloaked conquest in the language of liberation. They claimed they were saving these people from themselves or from some other looming power. The Greek-born Roman writer Plutarch later argued that conquered people were actually fortunate. By being subdued, they were made civilized. But for the Greeks, proud of their heritage, Roman rule was bitter medicine to swallow. They considered themselves superior in every way. To them, the Romans were barbarians. The irony was that Roman elites would learn to speak Greek fluently. Greek would become the language of philosophy, literature, and high culture. Even as Rome became the dominant power of the Mediterranean, it still looked up to the Greeks. They knew very well after the Pyrrhic War that they could beat the Greeks, and that their more flexible legion formations could get the better of the Macedonian phalanx. From there, Rome's dominance over Greece was only a matter of time.